Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a short story that I read because it is Short Story Tuesday. And today's short story is all about a woman trying to deal with a burglar. I am referring to A Woman and a Burglar by Charles Chesnutt, which was published in 1887. For those who don't know, Charles Chesnutt was an American writer who lived in the mid-1800s to the mid or so 1900s. He was a black writer, technically speaking. He was biracial, but he was biracial in a time where you would have been considered black, especially in the South. And I feel that's very important because of how he was considered by others of his time. He's like in photos, he's a very light-skinned black person, and that's because he's his grandfather was a white slave owner, which is again very significant, something worth talking about there. And so even though he looked white, if anyone found out that his mom and dad were black, they would have surely had considered him black and been oppressive towards him as a result of that. I'm getting bogged down in those details, but Chesnutt was a writer, wrote a lot of short stories and novels. They didn't sell particularly well, unfortunately for him, but they are critically regarded years after the fact. He frequently wrote about race, and he followed the literary realism and regionalism kind of style, which focused on portraying events as they were, and maybe not focusing as much on events so much as setting and people, which is something you see in this short story that I'm about to talk to you today. He a lot of people said he was emotionless in his writing, and that was both a compliment and also somewhat of an insult, and I definitely see that here today. Very interesting writer, and one that I am happy to have learned about. So without further ado, let's talk about A Woman and a Burglar. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So A Woman and a Burglar focuses on the character Mary. She has a husband. He's a doctor, Dr. Baird, pretty young, has to work quite a bit. And at the start of this story, Dr. Baird is leaving Mary at night in order to go watch over an ailing patient. They live near a sanitarium where Dr. Baird is kind of in charge of it. And so Dr. Baird is constantly leaving Mary at night to go help patients and check on people. And at Mary's request, Dr. Baird has installed a burglar alarm, which should help find patients and whatnot who have escaped or are trying to break into the house. And it basically eases Mary's fears. And before she goes to bed, she talks with her daughter Molly, who is trying to make a dress, and then she decides to go to bed. And then at midnight, the burglar alarm goes off. Mary is very alarmed, not really sure what to do. She's content to stay in her room, but she knows that Molly is downstairs. And so she doesn't want the burglars to do anything if they go into Molly's room. And so she grabs the revolver that they have, and she goes downstairs. When she's downstairs, she looks through her daughter's door and sees two men hovering over a body in a sheet, and Mary thinks, oh no, is Molly dead? Are they doing something to her? I should do something. And so she aims the gun and shoots, and then she passes out, presumably out of the shock of doing something like that. And then when she wakes up, Dr. Baird is there, and he recalls what happened, specifically that the nurse, the person ailing patient they were looking over, died, and so they brought the body back. I don't know why they put it in Molly's room specifically. As they were standing over the body, Mary shot, and the bullet didn't hit anybody, but it zoomed past another doctor's ears, and Dr. Baird was quite alarmed by that. But he helped his wife, and as the story comes to a close, the story notes that, or like the narrator notes that Baird adjusts the gun, so that because he knows he'll be coming in and out of the house, and he might accidentally trip the burglar alarm in the process, and he fills the guns with blanks, which is meant to be funny and kind of a way for Baird to learn from his lessons. But if anyone needs to shoot that gun in the future, oops, they're only shooting blanks now. So it kind of ends on a very odd and peculiar note there. In terms of analysis, there is a little bit worth talking about with a woman and a burglar. Not really a lot of meat in this story, unfortunately, and I think it's because of the writing style that Chesnutt uses here. One of the major ideas, or a couple of the major ideas, are that of literary realism and realism, as I noted in the author introduction. Chesnutt focuses on the characters and events rather than the themes. So literary realism is a focus on what is actually true, what is happening sometimes in the city, what is happening for people. Doesn't particularly like to embellish. And you get what you get with those kinds of stories. And then regionalism is focusing on like what is true for a specific group of people. It doesn't really focus on events so much as it does as the settings and the people. Kind of feels a little bit nostalgic. And there's a whole host of other things. I'll link to the Wikipedia page for regionalism in the comments, because it's a very interesting type of style that I feel like a lot of people might have encountered before, but didn't quite have words for. It focuses, like, this story focuses on like the characters, the setting, a few of the events, but it doesn't really focus on any of the themes. It doesn't really focus too much on the emotion of the moment. Rather, characters are just doing things. And so, it has no emotion on Chesnutt's side of the story. There's like, usually it's good that authors don't tell you how to feel, but it doesn't show how like Chesnutt feels about anything here. There's no real passion to. Or it's passionless. Like, there's no real passion for what Chesnutt is describing, which a lot of other authors and critics have noted about Chesnutt. Like, he's writing about a bunch of things and he's telling you as it is, and I guess he's leaving it up for the readers to decide what to feel about this. But when none of the characters particularly feel that much, like the most we ever get is like Dr. Baird, his worrying at the end, and Mary fainting, her fear there. But other than that, the story seems devoid of that emotion. But I do have to say that with regionalism and literary realism, it might seem pretty like poignant at the time that it was written. Like, the people at the time might have been like, oh yes, I can relate to this kind of feeling. But me, like 130 or so years later, I find it harder to relate to what Chesnutt is saying here. So literary realism and regionalism are interesting styles, but they definitely have their downfalls here. There's also a sense of irony in this story. In trying to protect her family, Mary nearly shoots her husband. And trying to save Molly, like, she accidentally shoots her husband, which would have been tragic, but that doesn't really happen here. And so, like, it's an interesting element to the story, but ultimately it's kind of dragged down by the fact that how could Mary not see that it was her husband? If the door is cracked and she sees two people hovering over a body, I know you're kind of panicking in the moment, but surely she recognizes what her husband looks like. Surely she could have seen the clothes that he was wearing, or maybe his doctor's coat, whatever he was wearing there, and she would have been like, oh, that's my husband, and she would have stopped panicking. I don't know why she doesn't realize that. Again, like, in the moment, we all kind of stress and whatnot, but you should be able to clearly tell if you can see some bodies moving around that it's your husband there. So I don't know. The story's kind of undermined by that fact. And the last thing that I'll mention, which I talked about in the literary realism and regionalism kind of part, is the emotionless nature of this story. It feels like an on-rails experience where you're not allowed to touch anything or move in any kind of direction or kind of feel for the story yourself. It's merely Chesnutt telling you what is happening. I liken it to a newspaper article because, of course, it was kind of written in that style at the time, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But like, again, given that the purpose of the story is to feel the emotion and whatnot, for it to be written by like a newspaper article, almost like a hoax of some kind, where you see in the past all those writers writing like hoaxes about science fiction and related stuff. Like, it's written in that style because these characters probably aren't real. But like usually in those hoaxes, you're trying to get someone to believe something. Here, you're just telling people what's happening. And so when it's written in that newspaper style, it like you think that the author's trying to impart something important, but it ultimately doesn't end up being that. And I think what the big problem here is that Chesnutt needs to dwell on certain aspects of the story. He needs to sit with something like why does Mary care about her family so much? Obviously, family is important, but what does family mean to Mary? What does she feel in that moment of learning that Molly might die? We learned a little bit, but not enough. And then, again, what relief does she feel? And why exactly is Baird choosing to replace the bullets in the gun with blanks? It's not 100% clear to the reader there, and it's because Chesnutt chooses not to dwell. Again, a lot of the time writers should writers do a great job of sort of letting the reader kind of feel their own thing. But here it's sort of, he's describing things and not dwelling there, and so we don't have enough time to feel anything, or we aren't feeling what the characters are feeling in any sort of meaningful way. And so if I told you, I went to the zoo, I saw a bunch of animals, and then a lion jumped out of its cage and ate a child, and I didn't express any emotions when I told you that story, you would think I was bizarre. You would think there was something wrong with me. And I feel like that's kind of happening in this story here. Anyway, those are my thoughts on A Woman and a Burglar by Charles Chesnutt. Unfortunately, I didn't have a lot of great things to say about this story, but I do like that I encountered Charles Chesnutt, as it's a very interesting and different style of writing, which might not be for me, but it might be for some of you out there. So I don't know, go check this out. I'll put a link to it in the description. Let me know your thoughts. It's pretty bizarre style. I might return to Chesnutt for some of his novels, as people have said good things about those, but I don't really have any desire to read any more of his short stories. If you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about Chesnutt. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about Chesnutt or the short story if they don't already know. Also, join the Discord if you want to have further conversations about books or movies or whatnot. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and burglar shooting travels. Farewell.